right, good morning, everybody. I'll go ahead and kick us off. I'd like to welcome everybody in to the East Tennessee History Center. This is a fun day. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. I hope it's clean enough for everybody. Hi, Georgiana. The exits, so everyone knows where they are in case something terrible will happen, are there and here, just in case you need to get out of the room. Also, I would like to thank our sponsors for today. First of all, First Bank is a sponsor, and of course, Friends of the Knoxville County Public Library, as well as Knoxville Community Media, who are here and will be making this available online later. So we're excited about our partnership with them. I also, of course, would be remiss if I didn't thank the sponsors, the primary presenting sponsors of our exhibition, Home Runs and Home Team, which is Boyd Sports. But before we dive into today's talk, I'm going to mention some of the upcoming talks that we're going to have throughout the month of July. We have tomorrow, not tomorrow, on the 5th, we have a beginning genealogy workshop at 1 o'clock. If you're interested in genealogy, that'll be great. I think that Ann Bloomquist is leading that one, is she not? Hey, Murray. Thanks for coming in. And on July 16th, we'll be having another baseball talk, which will also feature today's author, William Hardy, as well as other historians to come in and talk about baseball in Tennessee. It's history behind the home plate, and it's all different historians talking baseball. And then into August, on August 2nd, we have another genealogical workshop. And on August 13th, we have another baseball discussion, which I'm very, very excited about, called Baseball and the Bomb, and it looks at the history of the Oak Ridge team, the Oak Ridge Bombers. That is, of course, a brown bag section. It'll be at noon like this. And then on August 16th, we have the History Hootenanny, which will focus on sports and baseball this year. So we've got a lot going on about baseball. It's very baseball focused because we have this amazing exhibition, and the Smokies are back in Knoxville. So we're very, very happy about this. And now on to our speaker. Our speaker is Dr. William Hardy. He's an assistant professor of history and the Lincoln Scholar at Lincoln Memorial University. He specializes in 19th century American history and is taught at Tennessee Tech, Chattanooga State Community College, as well as the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. From 2005 and 2013, he worked at the East Tennessee Historical Society. So in many ways, we're welcoming him home today. And he's worked on various programs such as Teaching American History, the Teaching American History grant, as well as National History Day. He's also a fantastic vintage baseball player himself and goes under the alias Doc. I hope I'm not outing you in any way. And he's a tremendous friend of the Historical Society and a tremendous personal friend who has helped me with many historical projects myself around Fort Sanders and other things. So I'd like to welcome to the stage now Dr. William Hardy. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. And this is a home field advantage for me. Spent 8 wonderful years here at the East Tennessee History Center, working for the East Tennessee Historical Society. And if you're like someone like me who does Tennessee history, this place is a gem. You got Knox County Archives on the 2nd floor, the McClung Collection on the 3rd floor. A nerd geeks out in here, and I love this place. And you know, ever since I've been gone, since my last day was December 31st, 2013, I've never been a stranger. I don't think they can get rid of me. I think Dr. at first was probably wondering, who is this guy coming up here, always meeting with my staff here at the East Tennessee Historical Society, but it's the people here I love so much. It's a wonderful people in this building from each of these institutions. And so before I jump in on baseball, I would be remiss if, as the professor, one of the first things, and anybody who knows me knows what this day is. This is a historic day. This is our real day of independence, not that July the 4th day. It was July the 2nd where the Second Continental Congress voted on independence. And if you read the writings of John Adams, he was for sure that July 2nd was going to go down and be celebrated by Americans, shooting off fireworks and having barbecues. But like John Adams, He's always been in someone else's shadow, whether it was President George Washington or with the document that we celebrate on the 4th, Thomas Jefferson's document, though Adams and Ben Franklin had a little something to do with some of the revisions as well. And if you hear, sorry, a little extended lesson here, Ben Franklin probably would have wanted to draft the Declaration of Independence, but he said later he couldn't stand for anybody to tear it apart by revising it. So he gladly gave it to Thomas Jefferson. And we celebrate, obviously, July the 4th because it is the document which embodies who we are as Americans. Our ideas are what we hold out for the world to live up to. So I always tell my students, after informing them about the true day of independence, it is their job as the future to go out and get us a 3-day holiday weekend. And then I can retire and have felt like I've done something worthwhile. Thank you all, everybody, for being here. Today I'll be talking about the first founding fathers of Knoxville baseball. And I gave a talk based on my research that appeared in the 2022 issue of the Journal of East Tennessee History, plug, on baseball just 2 or 3 years ago. And C-SPAN came here, and it's on the YouTube page of ETHS. And so when the exhibit came up, Home Runs and Home Teams, I felt like I want to do a talk, but I don't want to do what I did. So, and with the other presentations, I think I saw Dean Novelli come in here, who did a wonderful presentation already on women in baseball. There'll be some, I think later, maybe African Americans in baseball, perhaps. But at any rate, I don't want to step on those toes and those subjects. So I will limit today, and I thought what would be a good thing to do is open up the historian's toolbox. When I worked here with Lisa Oakley in the education department, one of the things she did, she always asked about is, you know, we worked with teachers, professional developments, we worked with all age groups, but a lot of things that I did with the Teaching American History grant was working with school teachers, primary, secondary, social studies teachers. And we were always trying to show them how do historians craft their narrative. It's go out and get the primary sources. And what are those? Those are the necessary tools that we historians read and digest and then turn it into the narrative. And I thought, well, today would be a good thing with that exhibit, which there's not much written on baseball in Tennessee. So if you have a chance, if you haven't already, at the end of this, go down and see Home Run and Home Teams that Adam Alfrey, Rebecca, the team here at the East Tennessee Historical Society did a wonderful job in, and some other collaborators, because what's in there is really the first draft of much of early Tennessee history and Tennessee history in general there. And that now segues to my presentation in focusing on the early origins of Knoxville baseball and the founding fathers of really the first 2 teams. Now, I'm glad at the end in the Q&A section, after 3 hours, when we start the Q&A, to answer any more broader questions you have. But for the presentation, I'll limit it to those first 2 teams, some of those founding fathers. And if we have some time, we'll get into some action, some of those early games, which were thrilling. But my journey to writing the founding fathers' history of baseball was, I never expected it. My research was in Tennessee history, Civil War, but when I was working at the East Tennessee Historical Society in the summer or late spring of 2013, if I recall, Adam Alfrey comes in with a baseball, a vintage baseball, and sets it down on my desk saying, this is what we're doing next summer. And I was like, oh, really? This is interesting. And Adam had been to see vintage baseball, where it's basically, even though it's open to anyone, I think 18 to, as long as you can live and breathe and play baseball. And we've got some players who've been in their 50s, 60s, and 70s playing in the league. It's a lot of old guys that are like LARPers out there playing baseball, but really having a lot of fun. It's yeah, we have a lot of fun. I don't know what we do is play baseball much, but occasionally that's a Sports Center highlight out there. Dr. exaggerated my exploits in the garden, as we say, the baseball field of the 19th century. But at any rate, Adam had asked if I would be an umpire, and he came at it from a good place in his heart, because he thought, hey, Hardy here knows the history, and part of the vintage baseball game is educating the people who come out and sharing the game, the rules, the culture, the way of life, 19th century society, to be a big educational history lesson for those who turn out to these games. And I was like, okay, are you going to play? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to play. I'm going to be the captain. It's like, I want to play. I'd never played baseball in my life. And I grew up with a brother who was athletically inclined, and had he pursued it, probably could have been a heck of a darn baseball player. He was definitely an all-star in our community Babe Ruth league. But I always wanted to follow in his steps, and it didn't happen for reasons. And maybe I'll share that on the discussion session on July 16th. But I always wanted to play baseball, and I have had a lot of fun with this. And I do it for many reasons. Physical activity desperately needed, a chance for my kids to see me play, and just to be a kid again. But the other side is I always am a schemer. And I thought if I get into this game, there's a project to be had, because there's a lot of baseball history. There's not a lot of baseball history in the 19th century, especially in the South. And I thought, here's an opportunity. Learn this game, immerse myself into it, and do the research. So, where does Knoxville's baseball history begin? For the most part, the history of the baseball, up until about 10 years ago, was held largely, the bulk of it, the knowledge of it, on the third floor of McClung in the vertical foul photo collection. And if you opened it up, you would find an article from 1921 from an interview that the Knoxville Sentinel, a reporter with the Knoxville Sentinel, did with a Samuel Billings Dow, who at this point was a 82-year-old man. He was a prominent Knoxville merchant. He had come to Knoxville in 1864. He had started out as a United States revenue officer. His career in the United States military during the American Civil War was short-lived. He tried initially to recruit in the state of Indiana. The governor, Morton, told him, we've got enough troops. We don't need them. Well, that was in early 1861 when they thought the Civil War would be over if one battle. One line up, pew pew like Imperial stormtroopers. Nobody would get hurt. There'd be no bloodshed, and the war would be over. One side would have prevailed. Unfortunately, nobody could see it would last 4 years, and historians have escalated that bloodshed now to, we believe, somewhere between 750,000 up to 1 million when you take in not just soldiers but civilians, casualties as the Civil War. He eventually found his way into the United States Army and fought at the Battle of Shiloh. Well, he didn't fight at the Battle of Shiloh. He contracted measles. He got sick. And like so many soldiers, his Civil War was done because he was sick. He went back home, and he eventually found his way back into the military as a revenue officer in Knoxville in 1864 after the Union Army had come here and liberated Knoxville in the fall of 1863. He started out clerking as a grocery in a grocery store, eventually became partners in a grocery store, got into real estate, got into insurance. He was a very interesting man by all accounts. And he tells a interesting story to the Knoxville Sentinel reporter in November 20th, 1921. I'm not going to go into too much detail because Adam, as part of a talk for the Knoxville History Project about a month or so ago, did this in more detail on Sam Dowell's in this article. But the key points in the story, he told the reporter that he had organized the first baseball club in 1865. Oh, make mental notes of these. The quiz will be at the end. Number 2, his team, the Knoxville Knoxvilles, an original name, were the first baseball club organized south of the Mason-Dixon line. He was arguing that he had formed the first baseball club in the South in 1865. He called a meeting of 60 men he had put together. He calls them Northern and Southern men, men who had served in the Union Army and in the Confederate Army, men of Northern sentiments or Union sentiments, and those who had been more pro-secessionists. And Knoxville was a very divided city during the American Civil War and divided afterwards. And that shows in this baseball story because the Northern men appeared at the meeting, but the Southern men, or the men of Southern sentiment, ideology, were not there. The Northern men formed their club with Captain Sam Dow as the captain, the Knoxville Knoxvilles. The Southern men formed the Holston Baseball Club. He tells the story that he approached the McClungs, who owned property on Gay Street, the 400 block, about where today you start there, I guess, at Union Street and start heading north, in where Mass General Woodruff's was, where Sanford Chamberlain Albert's drugstore was at the corner of Union and Gay Street. And he tells the story that he approached the McClungs, and this land was broken up in the family. Various members owned pieces of that block, and it was just vacant. It was a dump, basically. The property fell off from Gay Street down to State, down to what is Central. And he thought this would be a good place. If we could clean up the field, there was briars and such, we can go in there and clean it out, we'll play baseball there. And as long as the McClungs had no intentions on building on that property or selling it to anybody. And what's key is, in 1865, at the end of the American Civil War, development on Gay Street, though on the west side, our side of Gay Street, had developed mostly up to the railroad. The east side stopped right across Caddy Corner where the hotel is today. I still want to call it the Farragut Hotel. That was residential property of John Crozer, who had a very lovely home and the last batch of trees on Gay Street at that point. And it was mostly vacant on the east side, heading all the way up, especially up to where Summit is today. And so the McClungs agreed. They cleared it, prepared the grounds for the Knoxville Knoxvilles to play baseball, while the Hostons went on to their own place. He says that where Woodruff's hardware store in 1921 was located, that's where home plate was. And he tells the story of a thrilling game in which his Knoxvilles prevailed, his leadership, his guidance, over the Hostons by 17 runs. It was an amazing game, full of notable injuries, and it's just an exciting story. And you know, you have to keep in mind he's 82 years old. He's recollecting something from 56 years ago, I guess, if I can do my math real quick. 56 years ago. How spot on is he going to be about all this stuff? And so, but keep in mind, there's still some of these guys who played baseball that were alive. So at the time, there was quite a few Holston members, as we'll see in a little bit. They were younger than the Knoxville Knoxvilles, but there were still some members of the Knoxvilles still around at this point. And Sam Dow had been one of the older players and seen as an older veteran, an ideal captain for this club. So there were still men around that could call him on anything. Now, that story, that vertical foul up there for reporters who've written stories on Knoxville baseball history, TV, anytime they want to do a story. There's a new baseball season, and one wants to do a quick little early, Knoxville baseball starts in 1865. They've gone to that foul. But beginning around 2008, Ron Allen's Same Old Smokies, Mark Albury's blog on Old Knoxville started in 2011. And then our own, I say our own, I feel like I'm still a member of the Historical Society. I am a member, and you should be a member too. There's a plug for the East Tennessee Historical Society. Adam, who I took this photo from his presentation a month or two ago, Adam, when he started forming the vintage baseball team, began digging in the history of baseball. And this is sort of my Mount Rushmore of Knoxville baseball historians here. Hopefully I can get a place on there as well to round it out. But historians always stand on the shoulders of those who come before us. We rely on their research. Hopefully they've done a thorough job. But sometimes we find that there's some things that need to be tweaked and revisions. But these three gentlemen, and Ron has passed since, but Mark is still very much around and will be at the panel discussion in 2 weeks, and Adam will be moderating. These three gentlemen really started to call question some validity of the story. After all, were you really playing baseball in 1865, in the spring of 1865, when the Civil War was just wrapping up? Knoxville is war-torn. Knoxville's, there's bullets, holes in buildings around, and and there's still armies here. Were you really playing baseball in 1865? And furthermore, was this really the first baseball team in the South? Because there's already histories out there where other cities have baseball being played prior to the American Civil War. And these gentlemen also found articles in the paper. They would go upstairs and use the microfilm, cranking that thing, give you a migraine to look at. Some of these historians have since taken advantage of technology. Library of Congress's Chronicling America project started digitizing, and now the great newspapers.com website and the search databases have gotten so much better. I still find new things when I put in the same search terms every few weeks when I go back to check something. And they found articles disputing some of what Dow had said. As far as the date, 1865, a lot of the stuff that Dow said you can find, but it's later, 1867. So, real quick, before going to, I don't want to go into too much depth about baseball, the amateur era baseball before it became professional. Long story short, the Knoxville teams that form here are just like anywhere else that baseball starts. It was a gentleman's game. Gentlemen who were on the up. Definitely the white-collar workers, the upper middle class to more elite gentlemen were the ones that played. And this was to get out, male fraternity, being with the boys and playing sports and having the leisure, not having to work from sun up to sundown for a living, to be able to have the leisure to go out and do these pursuits. They were the ones who started the baseball, what evolved into baseball. And this game, which is founded in the game that it turns into the modern baseball, the so-called New York game, really begins in the late 1830s, 1845, with the rules coming in. And baseball, this New York or Brooklyn game, begins to spread out. And I've just got some baseballs up here just showing you this is pre-American Civil War, and the game in the late 1850s begins to expand as a lot of these younger men in New York have made a name for themselves, and they go out west, they go out south, they go out beyond New York to seek opportunities to advance themselves, set up new businesses, and prosper in new communities. And they took the game with them. And clearly, the game was played in the South prior to the American Civil War. Nashville, Tennessee was playing baseball as early as 1860, out in Memphis playing in 1860 as well. So this game was well known, already spreading the country by the American Civil War. But the baseball fever takes off during the American Civil War as Northern soldiers come to the South. When there's no war to be fought, no battle to be fought, which was most of the time, the soldiers tried to find something leisure, and a lot of times one of the things they did was pursue baseball. And you can see here at a Union fort, they're playing baseball in the background of this photograph. The game was played in prison camps. This was another way that Southerners got to see the American Civil War firsthand as prisoners as well. And that helped expand the game. But by the end of the American Civil War, baseball had been exposed now across this country, maybe not out on the Great Plains and the Rockies, but as far out on the West Coast, it was being played. And articles throughout 1867 began this baseball fever as men of all ages and station begin to play. And what you see everywhere, it starts with the gentleman elite playing the game, and shortly thereafter, the game becomes democratized. It's in short order that baseballs become available, bats become available, and young kids start picking up the game in the streets, anywhere that the game can be played, and sometimes windows are broken. I'll come back to that in Knoxville and how the city of Knoxville had to deal with that. But the game takes off, and it's really 1867 that you see it raging across the country in all regions. So was Sam Dowell the founding father of baseball? Who is this guy? I've already talked a little bit about Sam Dowell, and where do we begin to find the answers? I found Sam Davis in a basement in North Carolina, which sounds scary. And my wife was wondering what the heck I was doing in COVID summer of 2020. Adam Alfrey, again, I stand on his shoulders. Those are mighty shoulders you got, sir. He had given a talk, and a great-grandson of Sam Dowell had showed up and left his information. And I don't know if Adam's got a lot on his plate, just never got around to it, but he had told me this. And so COVID summer, I'm like, I got to do something. I got to do some research. And I'm ready to do the baseball. And so I reached out to Adam and said, would you please give me his information? This was an email. It was several years old. I took a shot in the dark, sent the email. Next thing I know, I got a response, not from the great-grandson of Sam Dowell, but the grandson of Sam Dowell, a professor outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, in his 90s. And he was excited that somebody was wanting to dig into his grandfather's history and Knoxville baseball. And I got an invitation to go to the great-grandson home in North Carolina. And he took me down to his basement. That's the photograph there. And on the table was a wealth of Knoxville, East Tennessee history. Is Eric Dawson in the house? I am trying to get this gentleman to donate this collection. He realizes that none of his children, unfortunately, are interested in family history. And he has a wealth of information on the Dowells, the Maloneys, a circuit court judge in Knoxville, in Knox County, or East Tennessee. A lot of information. So I go down there, and I'm hoping to find some stuff. I found a lot about Sam Dowell that I didn't know. I was hoping to find a nugget of baseball. Would there be a scorebook? Would there be a diary or something? Well, there was a diary, but nothing about baseball in it. There was a lot of interesting things I've got photographs now of him galore and information, but nothing that could tie him to baseball in that collection. I did find out he was an excellent sharpshooter. He appears in an ad for the United States Cartridge Company. That's a photo of them. And below, there's one female sharpshooter, Annie Oakley. Pretty cool. And it's got an original. I'm just looking at it. I was like, this is awesome. Then he shows me this. One of Dowell's best buddies, his golfing buddy, richest man in America, John D. Rockefeller. He'd go down to Ormond Beach, Florida for the summers, or for the winters, and summer there, I guess, winter here, to play golf. And he had documents from John D. Rockefeller in their invitations, birthday gifts from John D. Rockefeller. It was pretty freaking awesome. I was like, this is cool. This is when you get the nerd moment and the hair stand up. And I'm a geek, let's face it. So anyway, great stuff. And really fleshed out a lot of history on Dowell that I didn't know about. So was he the founding father? I tried to look at some information. There was a diary. And I found some things that could be interesting. I wanted to know, where did Dowell learn baseball? Where did he pick it up? Well, he was born in Maine, Bangor, Maine. His family moved to Exeter, New Hampshire, right next to the academy where baseball was played early on, where Robert Todd Lincoln went to school and played baseball as well. He went to Louisville, Kentucky on the eve of the American Civil War, followed his brother to get into the grocery business to learn the trade. I can't pinpoint either Dowell or his brother playing baseball, but Louisville explodes in baseball in 1858, 1859, 1860. The papers are full of baseball stories. Who are playing? These merchants, these clerks, these grocery merchants, just like the Dowells would have been. I can't say for sure he was playing, but I'm pretty sure Dowell was well exposed to the game of baseball before he ever showed up in Knoxville in 1864. Now, through newspapers.com, a great source, I was able to start fleshing out articles and finding out more about baseball and Sam Dowell. And so, is he the founding father? I'm willing to say so, based upon especially an article I found in 1895 in the paper. And this article, now some 26 years or so, I'm a historian, I'm not a mathematician. I think 26 years before the 1921 article, in which everything lines up to Dowell. It's not told by Dowell. It's told by Charles Seymour, who was a lawyer, a gentleman involved in insurance and real estate, and a prominent Seymour name that's still around in Knoxville today in the legal profession, as I understand. The story tells, and the dates get a little bit more closer. He says 1865, it could have been 1866, but the accounts, the points are all on spot with Dowell, and it's clearly from Seymour because in this article, Seymour's name does not appear. In Dowell's article, he names Seymour. And what's interesting is he says, I went to the McClungs and I leased the property on Gay Street so we could play baseball. And so that was like, this is a real estate guy. He's into business. So he gives full credit to Sam Dowell. So I'm willing to say Sam Dowell, as a captain, is the guy who's heading up this ship, and he is the founding father of Knoxville baseball. In the research, in the going beyond a vertical foul and a Sam Dowell 1921 article recollections, the historian now, to tell the story, I've got to go find primary sources. And telling the baseball history, you got to be creative, and historians ask questions. And we're inquisitive. We're nerds, yes, we're inquisitive. We always ask questions. And I wake up at 3 a.m. in the night, and I got a pad beside the bed, and I write down things because I'm ready to doze off, especially these days, I get older. But I write down something really quick in the morning, if I can read my scribble, what it was. I had a brilliant question or idea. And going into the sources, I start finding more and more. And what kind of sources can I look at? City directories, beyond newspapers. I found this little nugget in the newspaper about a meeting when baseball is being organized. This is the first meeting. This is the meeting that Dowell refers to when he tried to get the Northern and Southern men together. They met on March the 19th at Star Billards, Cooper's Star Billards. And you can find all this information starting to come out through these sources. I've got a picture up here of Gay Street. It's been dated as 1869. It's a teaser. Come back in 2 weeks. I'm going to break that apart and date that as not 1869. But there in the article, in the photograph blown up, is Star Billards. You can see the sign, and I will say, through some of these signs, you can see the ball players' businesses. Another reason they couldn't have played in 1865. These men had come to Knoxville, most of them at the end of the American Civil War, and they were getting their businesses started. They had to get it up and running, make some money to have the ability to have a staff so they had the leisure to go out and play ball. But you can just look at this first photograph, known photograph of Gay Street down at the street level, and a lot of these businesses are Knoxville ball players or places where you could now pick up bats and baseballs that were being sewed immediately after these games started being played. But who are these other founding fathers? What clues can we find in the sources? And if you look at these box scores, what's the clue that we can, how is that a clue to help us find some ball players? Screaming it right there. Dowell gave us some names. Those box scores give me last names. The good thing is, Knoxville's a growing city, but there's not a lot of people. We're not 1 million people. Definitely not today. I can go to the directory and find these people. Also, through the sources, there were bachelor ads. Paper put out a bunch of eligible bachelors, and in there, he identified the names, their ages, he gave their professions, and a lot of them, he talked about baseball, because the baseball fever was raging. And what was funny was the newspaper editor didn't care for the Knoxvilles. He was a Holston fan. So if you read the Holston bachelors, these are athletic prowess. These are the epitome of a real man. Well, if you look at the Knoxvilles, he just beats them up completely. Sam Dow, I turn around to look at this one. Sam Dow, it's on the, right over here, age 28, junior partner in a grocery store. Not bad looking, agreeable in society, used to be considered good at baseball. Those are fighting words. But is now eclipsed by many brighter lights in said constellation. The younger guys, the younger Holstons, had a passion for female society and is rather partial to a fair one on Main Street, a good catch. Some of the other guys he beat up on for their inability to attract a female. So it's just scouring, asking questions. Where can I find sources? The U.S. Census. Once I get names, I can find where they live. I can find their age, birth, where they're from, what their profession is. And in some cases, in the 1860s and 70s, they gave you your how much they were worth, how much real estate, how much assets they had. That is if they told the census taker the truth. But a lot of information helped flesh out who these men were to get a good composite, a story of who were these ball players. And because they're prominent, they've got photographs in books on Knoxville history. They have collections up on the 3rd floor in McClung with photographs of them. And so these early two teams, the Knoxvilles and the Holstons, we have a rich bunch of history that we can tell who these ball players were. And so I identified 22 players for the Knoxvilles. And this is a who's who. This is a virtual directory of the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce. These are the men who were presidents of Knoxville Iron Company, Knoxville Gas Company, the railroads. They sat on boards. Not on this team, but the other team, there are mayors. So these are very prominent people. My favorite is Bill Chamberlain, William Bill Chamberlain up at the top, who started out as a Knoxville, and he was recruited by the up-and-coming, much better, younger lights of the Holstons in their second season. And I see Zachary Keith in the back here, who one day, and this is the good thing about historians, get to know your archivist, who told me, he says, I think you might want to come over here and look at this. And he had a collection, he was going through processing, and it was a bunch of Bill Chamberlain papers, and had Civil War letters, had a photograph of him in his uniform. Just cool stuff, rich stuff, just sitting up here in our collections and archives in McClung. But I will say this, I was interested in telling this story is what can we learn from this team and Knoxville society and who was playing. And of these 22 men, when you get down to it and you look at who they are, you find some common traits. 13 of these 22 ball players were United States soldiers in the American Civil War. Most of them are Buckeyes, Ohioans who came down here in 1863 with Burnside's army and who fell in love with East Tennessee. And after the war, these were men on they were men on the rise, and they decided where would be a place to go. Knoxville, Tennessee. This is a place that, though Tennessee was a devastated state, East Tennessee took off real well at the end of the American Civil War because this is where the Unionists were in control. This had a strong Unionist sentiment, and the Unionist government, the radical Republicans of Parson Brownlow's government, funneled resources over to East Tennessee as opposed to more secessionist Middle and West Tennessee. Now, one story that I found in my baseball history is long time American history. The story is at the end of the American Civil War, carpetbaggers from the north came down here to the south. Are these carpetbaggers? These are certainly men who took advantage of East Tennessee and its resources, tapping into the various key resources like iron and such in this area, and they made a fortune. But Knoxville welcomed them in here. They wanted these energetic, men from the north, visionaries, men who would spend money. They wanted them to come down here, marry Southern belles, which they mostly did, integrate into Southern society, and don't bring any Northern outside ideas. And they were welcome. Those who didn't, well, they didn't last long in Knoxville. They were gone within a few years. But these men were welcome. And these immigrants to East Tennessee, as they were, really became, part of this society here. And you've got old Knoxville society, you've got immigrants from foreign countries who have come here in the lead up to the American Civil War, and then you've got these Northerners, these Yankees who have come. And they really blended well with society. And like I said, most of them took Southern wives, just didn't cause any trouble as far as changing society here. These guys are all high-ranking officers. They're not privates or anything like it. These are officers from first lieutenants up to brigadier generals. Luther Stephen Trowbridge is a brigadier general, the highest ranking in this group. So these men were older on the average. They averaged the age of, as I try to find my number here, they were on average 25 and a half years old. They were highly educated, a lot of college educated. A lot of them were going to East Tennessee University, the forerunner of the University of Tennessee. A lot of lawyers, a lot of bankers. High professions, elite gentlemen. Were they all Union soldiers? Were they all the Northern men? Well, the gentleman up here, John Paxton, was a Confederate captain of Paxton's Grays. He's an outlier of this club. But if you look in the directory and you look at the Masons, they're all members. Dow and Paxton were members of the same organization and became close friends. On the whole, largely Northern men, largely Union soldiers. That's true for the Knoxvilles. What about the Holston Club? These Southern men, do they fit that story that Dow told? Well, these men, younger, 21 years of age is their average, so they're about 4.5 years younger than the Knoxvilles. 3 sets of brothers. I'm going to butcher this. I've never learned it. You all tell me. Is it Luttrell? Luttrell. Thank you. I'm not from around here, surprise. I'm from the great Commonwealth up north, Kentucky. Forget Virginia, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. God's country. But I love East Tennessee, so can we say East Tennessee, Tennessee, and Kentucky is just, we don't talk sports, okay? But we've got Luttrells, 2 mayors, Samuel and James, whose father was the mayor during the American Civil War here in Knoxville. We have the Armstrongs. These are some prominent names among the Holstons. This is old, some old Knoxville well-named. Asa Hazen, William Caswell, one of the wealthiest men in the area, in the Knoxville area. These gentlemen, not as many United States Civil War soldiers. 4 soldiers, 2 Unionists, 2 Confederates. 2 of them didn't even see service. One's a Union medical cadet. The other one was a Confederate courier. The only 2 that saw action were the Luttrell brothers, Samuel and James. James was a Confederate. Samuel was a Unionist. Divided Knoxville. Divided families. Just as educated as the Knoxvilles, and these are men who, as well, Chamber of Commerce, as I said, 2 mayors, prominent ball player, prominent Knoxvillians. The sources, where did they play? Maps. Using maps and newspaper articles have given some clues. Dow already told us Gay Street, and everything lines up perfect. I've gone to the Knoxville archives, have looked at the land that the McClungs owned. That land you can look at in the 1867 map was clear on Gay Street? There's no doubt they played, and there's tons of articles in the newspaper saying Gay Street, and they allude to the Gay Street baseball grounds for years and years, decades afterwards. Where did the Holstons play? This was fun. I really had to dig. The 1895 article gave me a clue. It said the Holstons played along Cripple Creek. Here's a shout out to Knoxville History Project and the great Bob Booker, who had done research on the Cripple Creek area along First Creek. They placed the Holstons right down at that area. And so if I look at the 1867 map, I put a red baseball in the general area. I can't say for certainty, but this, and looking at a picture from 1873, this lines up as a clear area where there was no development. Y'all know what's there now? The baseball stadium. We need to tell Mr. Boyd, how about that? Knoxville baseball has returned to Knoxville and back to its original roots, or one of the earliest teams. Can't say for certainty, but the sources kind of put it right there, and it was the only clear land, and it lines up exactly where, a lot of First Creek now is under, streets, but where the creek was. And so using photographs, using maps, this is a great map of 1867 up on the third floor of McClung. First Creek. And Cripple Creek was the general area, the community, they referred to it. And you see that name more in the 1880s, 1890s beginning. It was an African-American community. They're along, flooded. And that's where they lived, in that general area. I am now in the first hour, starting to come to the end of the 3-hour lecture. I can talk forever, and I don't want to keep you here forever. So at this point, I'm going to stop and not necessarily go into some of the baseball stories, but I can. But I do want to say one thing. Research never ends. And Mark Aubrey sends an email to me at about midnight a couple nights ago, and he says, I found an article that alludes to the Knoxville City Council in 1867, just 2 months after baseball is beginning to be played, and they're passing an ordinance against people throwing baseballs in the streets. And the glass has been broken. And so, don't get whiplash here. It says June the 7th, 1867, if I get that correct. June the 7th, 1867, an ordinance was passed by the mayor, James Churchill Luttrell, and the city council, and that there's going to be a fine of $10 if you're caught throwing a baseball. And there it is in the city council meetings on our microfilm there. I just saw that yesterday. I got that and found that. And it tells me about the game becoming democratized. There are little nuggets in these articles of young boys playing. And some pressure on these baseball clubs, these Holstons and Knoxvilles, to go out and play those boys. Y'all are being lazy. You need to get out and play some baseball. And that these kids will play. And some of these kids beating those clubs. The Holstons, who win the state championship in 1867 in their first season. Take off the winter. Take off the spring in 1868. Summer begins, and the editor of a newspaper is like pressing the Holstons, come out of retirement and play. And young boys say, we'll play. And the challenge is made, and the Holstons finally say, we'll come out and play. And the kids whoop their butts soundly. We're talking double-digit runs. And it's another little nugget of how baseball is being played, but the newspapers don't cover it. So much of Knoxville baseball history is lost because these papers covered these guys because these were the movers and shakers in Knoxville. And the papers were so politicized. They didn't know what to make of baseball. There's a flood of baseball articles early on because it's something new. It's a novelty. Everyone's getting off work at 5 or so to go watch baseball. Ladies are turning out. Ladies are really excited about baseball. And so there's something new there. And so we get little nuggets of kids playing, African American baseball clubs are active, wanting to play these teams, and these white teams not wanting to play with them. We know baseball is raging. The baseball fever was here in 1867, and it took off. It's as crazy as you all are about football. And it's the national game. It's a great day to celebrate the national game on our true day of independence, July 2nd. So I'll stop there. I'm glad to take any questions, but I will add in closing. If you want to know more about this, if you want to read my article on baseball, it's available for free on East Tennessee Historical Society's website. I know it's a long link. I can get it to you. You can Google the article, my name, and it'll pop up, as well as you can go to this site. Mark Aubrey's put every Knoxville hosting games, and you can see the article, the newspaper. You don't need a subscription. You just click on it. You can read these reports for yourself. There's a lot out there. We were trying to share it with the public, and please make sure you see that exhibit down there, because there's a little bit of me down there and a little bit of Adam and Mark and all these people who are starting to tell this story. Dean, who are telling this story about women and African Americans and baseball, and it's a great time here. And you know, I'm a Kentucky Wildcat. I will say that I was brainwashed because I'm Kentuckian, but I did graduate with my PhD from the University of Tennessee. So I'm an adopted Vol, and baseball is as big as ever back now in Knoxville. So it's come full circle in so many ways. I thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Dean?
You know me, I always got questions.
Go ahead.
The map with the two baseball ballparks, what's the time period for?
That is, okay, so that map, which sets up on the third floor of McClung, that's a photograph of it up there. That's an 1867 map from a map maker, I believe, out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Not interested in the map, when are you putting the ball fields there? What time period for the ball?
1867. So I didn't really get into that. I did that my first time I did the talk a couple years ago, but baseball starts in May. The baseball clubs are organized in late March, April 1867. First game, May 4th, 1867. Knoxville's Holstons. It's the only time the Knoxvilles that we ever report beat the Holstons. Although Sam Dowell says they beat them several times. So I'm not saying that Dowell's wrong. I just, as a historian, I've got to stick with the sources. So 1867 is when we get these ball fields. Gay Street gets cleared, that lot on 400 block of Gay Street, thanks to the McClungs. Seymour and Dowell goes in there. And then the Holstons set up their grounds there along Cripple Creek, and ball games were played on both fields. The Gay Street one gets a lot of attention because the early games were played there, but later people were playing on the Holstons field as well. And we know that there are other teams like the Emmett Machinists of North Knoxville, Railroad Mechanics, who were playing ball up in, I guess it would be the Mechanicsville area of Knoxville. And so there's a lot of more open land out there. So other clubs are playing. East Tennessee University has a baseball club. There's a lot of games going on around town. But these are the two primary ball fields, gardens, as we like to say in the 19th century.
The one in the red, that would have been the stockyards and barracks for soldiers and whatnot during the war down in there. I've been researching that time period for another reason. Other question, you just mentioned African Americans. You know this, Mark knows this. I've been working with Patrick Hollis. We've been trying to find Mabry Graves. Have you ever heard of them? Have you ever run into them? We've got two new.
Say the name again.
Mayberry Graves.
The Mayberry.
House. It's an African American team. Joseph A. Mayberry is the sponsor. We believe it to be a black man named after.
Yeah.
We can't. Two newspaper references. They play a game. You know, two sentences. You know how it goes. When I was doing my women's research, I ran into the same thing in the 30s and 40s. Tremendous amount about the white clubs. An occasional sentence or two about the black clubs, and you know that there's got to be just
definitely. Well, we know that we got teams from Greenville coming down here because African American clubs want to play ball, and nobody wants to answer them. The first thing about women, I'll say this, is in the mid-1870s, there's a report that a women's club wants to come down here and play, but nobody wants to play them. We know in 1867, baseball fever has raged. It's gone off very well for the Holstons in this city, and they put together a Knoxville championship. And championships were as simple as two clubs coming together usually and saying, we're going to play for the championship. And so when we say the Holstons are the 1867 state champions, a team out of Chattanooga, the Mountain City Club, said, we're going to play you. And so we'll call it the state championship. But Knoxville has a championship. And the idea is to bring in all these clubs that are part of a league, an association of amateur baseball clubs. That's in my article. That I elaborate more about the formal rules and organization of baseball in 1867 in this area. And they want to invite anyone who's in this association is free to come. And they planned this November 1867, this grand tournament. People are putting up prizes, silver, balls. George Smith, the jeweler, puts out jewelry, just a host of prizes. Unfortunately, a lot of teams canceled because inclement weather is supposedly coming into this area. And some teams show up in the African American clubs. We know there's at least three, could be more, in this area, in this city. They were playing baseball, and they're asking, we'd like to play, and they did not allow them to play. It was very segregated as far as baseball here. And so we know there's African American clubs, and it doesn't surprise me. And knowing Patrick, I would think Patrick might have something in his collection, but then again, you never know where this stuff's going to end up. We know so much baseball history is lost. It's not reported in the papers. We know in the 1895 article, Charles Seymour says, I have a scorebook from the Knoxville Knoxvilles. We know T.M. Slyer, a well-known photographer, took a photograph of the Holstons after they won the state championship in 1867. We don't know where that photograph is. We know there's a cool cigar box depicting a game where someone hit a home run, supposedly from where Woodruff's was all the way down to where Jackson Street would be or so, but the ground did slope down. There's a lot of great baseball history that's been lost, or is it hiding in an attic that nobody knows about? I have no doubt, but no, I have not heard any more about the Mabry. And I've been looking into some Mabry stuff with Lisa and Patrick as well.
We've been scouring for years.
The sad thing is, it's a novelty when they ask and they're denied, and it's noted that there's some games going on. The Holstons and the Knoxvilles played, but also there's a Lamore House group that played, an African American baseball club.
The Warriors had their own club.
Exactly. And they're playing in 1867. These teams form immediately after they see the Holstons and the Knoxvilles begin playing ball. The baseball fever catches all people, every age, station, race, gender. Do we know if women were playing? Don't know if there was a club, but who knows? Young girls might have been out in the streets breaking that glass, causing that $10 fine. Sorry, let me put my eyes on.
Yeah, you mentioned that the teams, the Knoxvilles, the Holstons, were kind of segregated in terms of what their affiliation was during the late unpleasantness. I wonder if that unpleasantness continued on the ball field. It'd be interesting. In other words, was this sort of just civil war by proxy, or were they quite friendly on the ball field?
For the most part, I will say this. The Knoxville Holstons and the Knoxvilles got along. And one of the things about the games is often after a game there'd be a banquet. Be a dinner. The one club would host the other, big dessert. But sometimes other clubs traveling in, would cause an uproar afterwards. The game had been close. The most legendary game ever played in Knoxville, so to speak, in 1867, that is, happened on Thanksgiving Day, 1867. The undefeated Gate City Club of Atlanta showed up. This is like the Cincinnati Red Stockings before they showed up in 1869. This was an amateur team that was played every club in the South and defeated them soundly. And they started looking for the best clubs. Well, the Holston had just won the state championship in 1867, and they just won the Knoxville championship in 1867. And Gate City sends a challenge to the Holstons. It was a fierce contest. Gate City had the Holstons down, and going into the bottom of the eighth, the Holstons came back and took the lead by 1. And then in the ninth inning, things got a little bit chippy. And the Gate City team pulled it out. If you read the articles from Knoxville, it was a grand affair. They admit, they were bested by the bully boys of Atlanta. And a great feast was had, friendship, camaraderie, male fraternalship. But in Atlanta, they tell a story the Knoxville men were the rudest, ungentlemanly like, and that they, under their breath, were cursing them. And so for years, when Atlanta baseball historians write about their origins, they like to tell the story of the Gate City Club of Atlanta. This undefeated traveling club never lost a game before they retired from their laurels. But they always tell the story of the most pivotal game in the Gate City history against those Knoxville Holston Baseball Club. And those were ungentlemanly. They treated them unfairly because they were a bunch of sore losers. And that gets reprinted in all the Atlanta baseball history, whether you can find it out there. It's still being printed in books. Now they can just read Hardy and look at the Knoxville side and get another perspective. I'm going to say both sides agreed to disagree. But there was a series of letters that got printed in the newspaper afterwards going back and forth between the captains of each club. So,
They're a bunch of sore losers.
well, that's what they said the Holstons were. So, yes.
At risk of being a word nerd, what's the difference between
we're-
two-word baseball?
Oh, yes,
and
thank you.
one-word baseball?
The reason I have that up there is because in the 19th century, you find baseball. And it doesn't really become more the one word until you really get into the late 1880s, 90s, and then into the 20th century. But early on, if you look at these baseball clubs, you'll look at those who have minutes and everything, and they're formally organized like a board, a committee and everything. It's baseball. Yeah. So a lot of times you'll see abbreviated the club and then BB. Yes. It's a great question.
I don't know if this helps, but originally it was town ball, 2 words, so by analogy,
Yeah.
this will be baseball.
The origin of baseball, it comes from many manifestations of it, but town ball, yes. And as a Lincoln scholar, I'm contractually obligated in any presentation to bring up Lincoln. Lincoln was a big fan of town ball and was playing town ball on the day he awaited his results in the 1860 presidential election.
I guess before baseball, what was sports? Do people have a conception of sports as a spectator thing or part of their lives?
Well, there were sports, but this thing really develops in the late. I mean, we can find sports going back to French Indian War. I had a lacrosse player, and I'll go, "You're going to love my lecture today because Native Americans crossed a ruse with a lacrosse game and got their way into a fort." But I mean, sports really takes off in America. It becomes something in the 1820s, 30s, more of an elite culture, bring it on, a way to get out, and they've got the leisure, the ability to exercise, nourish the body, the mind, the soul. Christianity tied in. These are all very deeply faithful men, and it was part of an ideology of it. And but sport's been around, and there's also a negative side to it. And early in the baseball showing up in 1867, gambling became an issue, and the courts had to get involved in Knox County about what's going on. But yeah, sports, I don't know if I'm answering it exactly what you're looking for, but it becomes much more democratized after the American Civil War, where more and more people are able and participating.
Yeah, I guess like around here, how did baseball fit into people's lives? It's like there's this new thing where we go.
It just rages out of nowhere in 1867 because they're just, by and large, unaware of the sport. You start to hear about it, picking up in newspapers, but it takes off, and people are taking off work, closing down, and the estimates are thousands are showing up. And Gay Street had an amphitheater-like feel to it, where the ground sloped off, so it was a natural. The people just sat up on the banks and watched the game, but it's reported that couple thousand are showing up to these games. Yes.
I noticed the name Caswell. which
Yes.
is up there in the earlier ballpark in Knoxville, is there in Caswell
Yes.
Park. Is there any connection? to
Yes,
that?
and these gentlemen are supporters of the national game. And I can't say, I'm not going to, Mark Aubrey would probably be one of the best people to know. He's done some research on that. I don't want to say for certain, my assumption would be Caswell's involved in that. I know Chamberlain, Bill Chamberlain, who gets in the Sanford Chamberlain Albert's drugstore. He's a big supporter. He's a president of baseball clubs in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. He's donating money to build more modern parks when we get with fences and everything, ticket booths and everything, and we in the late 19th century and on. So these gentlemen are actively involved. I don't want to say that without having more proof that William Caswell was one of the wealthiest men in this area. And that was a picture of him there with his pony that I had.
Yeah.
Yeah, there he is. Yes, his black pony that he loved.
But you don't think he had another team over there? where that-
A lot of these wealthy men have businesses start teams, and you see this: police, fire department, the mills, and everything have their own baseball clubs. And some of these men are presidents or are partners in these businesses. But I don't want to say with any certainty that William Caswell himself that's attributed to that park. I just don't know that per se. It's a good assumption it is. All right. Any other questions? All right. I thank you all so much for coming out. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to still answer. Thank you.